right, and so is there any other issue?
No, Your Honor.
Now that you have a clarification from the media's lawyers, is there a stipulation to the defense evidence?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
And Your Honor, I do have an unopposed motion to determine confidentiality of 2 exhibits that I'll hand to the clerk for filing at this time. Those exhibits have been marked as 1 and 2. They are letters from a medical provider and a mental health provider.
All right, and there's no objection to those?
No, Your Honor.
And Your Honor, I also have Exhibit 3, which is a declaration from Andrew Wagley, a Washington State lawyer, with an order of dismissal in the extradition case for Ms. Gardner. And Exhibit 4 is an email from Hank Cox to Ms. Stifler. And Exhibit 5 is a composite exhibit that includes excerpts from a purchase agreement and deeds for 2709 Ocean Drive, Jacksonville Beach.
No objection.
Okay, those will be so entered. That is, defense exhibit 1 and 2 will be, I've granted the confidentiality, so they shall not be disclosed.
This one tabbed is the one.
Ms. Smith, you can do a full more on that one.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other housekeeping matters?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
One more housekeeping matter, Your Honor.
Okay.
On the Zoom is Mr. Angel Cortinas. He's a lawyer for one of our witnesses, John Curry. I just wanted to inform the court of his presence on Zoom.
All right, thank you. Ms. Mansfield, how are you?
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
I didn't mean to put you in a bond, we need an answer.
About,
Oh, did you come over for that?
yes. I heard it's
It's
one
different.
for here and I'm.
No, okay, I needed an answer. That is the defense filed 2 exhibits that they assert are confidential in nature. They have sensitive information in it.
I believe this is what defense counsel emailed me about yesterday.
Yes,
Yes, there's no objection first because there's a time meeting.
okay. I'm sorry we can come over.
And I know that WJXT does it because I spoke with their counsel yesterday plus as well.
Yes, thank you. I didn't mean to make you rush over.
When the court calls.
Okay. I'm trying to find the docket line of the defense motion. Ms. Smith, do you have it? So the state filed a motion for pretrial detention, and I just found it. And then we're also, for record purposes, holding the hearing on defense motion filed in docket line 70. The state indicated that they're going to go first.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. The state can call their first witness.
The state calls Detective Chris Jones.
Do you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
May I justify you?
Yes.
afternoon, Detective.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Christopher Johns.
And Detective Johns, what agency are you employed with?
I work with the Jacksonville Beach Police Department.
And how many years have you been, I'm going to call it Jax Beach PD for time's sake while we speak. How long have you been employed with Jax Beach PD?
A little over 5.5 years.
And prior to your employment there, could you describe for the court your education and job experience?
I mostly worked in the financial industry, mostly consumer banking and investment management. I held a stockbroker's license as well as a firm principal's license, and I'm currently registered with the SEC as an investment advisor.
And with the Jacksonville Beach Police Department, what's your current role?
I'm a detective in our General Investigations Unit, which handles pretty much everything with the exception of vice or drug crimes.
So that would include homicides, armed robberies, major crimes, all the way down the line.
Yes, ma'am.
And did you have any special training or experience to become a detective in the General Investigations Unit?
On top of the police academy, I've attended approximately 300 hours of specialized training in criminal investigations or crime scene investigations, about 120 of that being for death investigations and homicides.
And you are the lead investigator, lead detective who was assigned to investigate the homicide of Jared Bridegan, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your initial involvement in this case. February 16, 2022, were you dispatched to a scene in which Jared Bridegan was the victim?
Yes, ma'am.
And where in Jacksonville, Duval County, was this homicide scene?
I was dispatched to Jacksonville Drive and Sanctuary Boulevard, which is it's really an on-ramp to JTB and also serves as an entrance into a neighborhood called the Sanctuary.
And when you arrived on scene, was Jared Bridegan already deceased?
Yes, ma'am.
There was a child in the vehicle with Jared. And I don't want to use her name because she's a minor child, but are her initials BB?
Yes.
And what was her relationship to the deceased victim, Jared Bridegan?
It was Jared's daughter,
Do you know approximately at the time of your arrival on scene how old she would have been?
about 2.5.
When you arrived on scene, where was BB located?
When I arrived on scene, a good Samaritan had grabbed her from her car seat, which was in the back of the vehicle, and taken them to their vehicle and covered her with a blanket.
Do you recall what BB's demeanor was like when you encountered her on scene that night?
She was very upset, crying, scared, obviously.
And the Good Samaritans relayed to you that they had taken her out of her car seat. Did you have the opportunity to observe Jared Bridegan's vehicle on scene that night?
I did.
And Jared himself was not in the vehicle.
Correct.
Can you describe for the court, in relation to where BB was seated in her car seat, what damage you observed to the vehicle?
In relation to where her car seat was, she was in the back, but at least 2 rounds struck the interior of the vehicle, one of them striking the bottom of the window seal and shattering the window. It would have been just in front of her car seat.
And I guess I didn't ask this specifically, but Jared Bridegan was pronounced deceased by the medical examiner, cause of death being gunshot wounds.
Yes, ma'am.
And from your review, were there projectiles that entered into the vehicle in which BB was in her car seat?
There were.
Did she make any statements to you or other investigators with the Jacksonville Beach PD that night?
She made mention of hearing a loud sound, boom, boom, saying that she had to take her shoes off to cover her ears, and she made mention that her daddy was sick and was on the ground and needed a doctor.
I want to skip ahead in your investigation. You obviously did many hours of investigation, many interviews in the days and weeks and months following your response to this scene.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you eventually were able to make an arrest in this case for the murder of Jared Bridegan?
Yes, we made 3 arrests.
And who did you arrest?
Henry Tennant, Shanna Gardner, and Fernandez.
I want to speak for a moment about Henry Tennant. Henry Tennant was arrested and charged with the murder of Jared Bridegan, including the discharge of the firearm that caused his death.
Yes, ma'am.
And to your knowledge, has Henry Tennant pled guilty to his role in the murder of Jared Bridegan?
He did.
Were you present when Mr. Tenen gave what's called a sworn statement in conjunction with his plea, which outlined his involvement in Jared's murder?
Yes, I was.
What did he advise you about how it was that he came to be involved in Jared's murder?
Mr. Ten was a tenant at one of their rental properties, and he had been approached by Mr. Fernandez a number of times, asking him if he would participate in this homicide. Mr. Tenen stated that he initially denied Mr. Fernandez's request. However, once Mr. Fernandez had agreed that they would, being Shanna and Mario, would invest $150,000 into a pallet business, he agreed to participate.
Okay, and I want to go back and ask some follow-up questions about that. When you say that Henry Tenen said Mario Fernandez requested him to participate in a homicide, what specifically was that conversation, according to Mr. Tenen?
He stated that in exchange for the money, that Mr. Fernandez would provide a firearm, and then they would contrive a plan. Initially, the plan was to kidnap Mr. Bridegan and then take him to another location and murder him.
And did Mr. Tenen advise as to what, if anything, Mario Fernandez Saldana said about why he wanted to murder Jared Bridegan?
They had initially planned, or were planning this in late 2021, and then after returning from a Hawaii trip in February, Mr. Fernandez approached Mr. Tenen and stated that this needed to happen this week. And if he didn't get it done, that his marriage was going to end.
Did Henry Tenen know Jared Bridegan?
No, he did not.
Had he ever seen him before the night of the homicide on February 16, 2022?
No. In fact, there were 2 instances where Mr. Fernandez took Mr. Tenen in an attempt to show him Mr. Bridegan, and both of those were failed attempts.
Other than the relationship of Mr. Tenen being a tenant of Mario Fernandez Saldana and Shanna Gardner's rental company, were you able to find in your investigation any other link or connection between Henry Tenen and Jared Bridegan?
None.
In your conversations with Henry Tenen, was Mr. Tenen able to, even before this night, describe what Jared Bridegan looked like?
Not at all.
What type of car he drove?
Nothing.
Did he know on the night that he murdered Jared Bridegan that BB would be in the vehicle with him?
He did not know that.
Detective, I'm going to draw your attention to a screen that's in your witness box. Some of these exhibits have been entered by agreement of both parties. I'm going to start with Exhibit 1. Detective, what is this?
These are articles of organization for a limited liability company named First Choice Home Rentals LLC. And the second document is an annual filing for that same LLC.
Okay, so when you say the annual filing on State's Exhibit 2, this would be the annual report of First Choice Home Rentals LLC.
Correct.
Going back to State's Exhibit 1, you have some familiarity with this from your prior experience. Who are the title holders or principals on these articles of organization?
Both Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez are listed as managing members, or which would be considered owners of the LLC.
And the LLC is First Choice Home Rentals. What was the business of this LLC as incorporated?
The business was established to manage their rental property holdings.
And these are some of the articles, the full exhibit the court will have, but under Article 5, the electronic signator on this Articles of Incorporation is Shanna Gardner. Is that correct?
I don't recall, to be honest with you.
Moving to State's Exhibit 2, this document is an annual report. What does that mean?
This is just a document that's filed every year to basically let the state know that this is still an active company and that to make any changes to the ownership or management of the company.
And this was filed in the upper right-hand corner, January 28, 2022, which was a few weeks before the murder of Jared Bridegan. And again, at the bottom, who are the still owners or signatories on this LLC?
The listed owners are Shanna Gardner and Gardner-Fernandez.
I'm turning your attention to State's Composite Exhibit 3. Detective, can you describe for the court what these documents are?
This is a bank statement from Navy Federal Credit Union that held the account for First Choice Home Rentals.
And in the exhibits the court will receive, you obtained these records via subpoena, and they are accompanied by certification of records from Navy Federal.
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a red box here. Can you describe for the court what that is indicating?
The red box is indicating a transfer from a separate checking account also held in a Federal Credit Union. In this instance, it's stating that on March 15th, $5,000 was transferred from the Shanna Gardner Irrevocable Trust account at Navy Federal into the First Choice Home Rentals account.
And this is another exhibit on, or another page on Composite Exhibit 3, again showing that the First Choice Home Rentals LLC was getting, appears to be monthly transfers from the Shanna Gardner Irrevocable Trust.
There was another transfer in April of the same amount.
And we'll come back to that trust in a moment. I'm going to move to State's Exhibit D. What records are we looking at here?
This is a PNC bank statement for Mr. Henry Tennant's account.
4. I'm sorry, Composite Exhibit 4. In your discussions with Mr. Tennant involving how he became a part of this scheme to murder Jared Bridegan, you mentioned that he was promised a payment. Can you give us any more details about what Mr. Tennant advised you that he was promised and how he would receive this money?
He was promised $150,000 in the form of investment into a pallet business.
And was this payment going to come in a lump sum or in installments?
It would be installment payments.
Was there any discussion of why that would be the case?
As to not raise any suspicion.
And moving through Composite Exhibit 4, documents for Mr. Tennant, and a portion of his standard checking statement. Okay. I'm drawing your attention to the screen now. There's a red box. Can you describe for the court what is indicated by that on this checking statement?
The statement is indicating a deposit for $2,000 on March 28th, which would be in line with the check that's in the top right-hand corner.
And this is March 28th, 2022.
Correct.
And this would be about a month and some time after the murder of Jared Bridegan.
That's correct.
And then a second red box.
Correct.
Describe what this indicates.
This is a check that was deposited on the next day, on March 29th, for $3,000, also written from First Choice Home Rentals.
Okay. And on the next slide, we see the final check and final box. Can you describe what we're seeing here?
This check was on April 6th for $5,000, written to Henry Tennant from First Choice Home Rentals.
And in the subject line, it says Kickstarter, good luck. Can you describe for the court, based on your conversations with Mr. Tennant, what this check was actually for?
Mr. Tennant stated this was the first of many payments that was supposed to be an investment into his pallet company, which was actually payment for the homicide.
Now, the prior checks, the $3,000 and $4,000, were marked for landscaping and roofing. What did Mr. Tennant say about those payments?
He stated that those payments were for legitimate work that he'd done on the rental property on Potomac Avenue.
So this was the first and the only payment he actually received from First Choice Home Rentals for the contract killing of Jared Bridegan.
Correct.
I want to talk about Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez, your development of them as suspects in this case. When you were investigating the murder of Jared Bridegan, were you able to eliminate, through investigative techniques, other potential suspects?
In the beginning, we really didn't have any suspects. We looked at everyone who might be close to the family, any relatives, spouse. And so through various techniques, we do start to kind of eliminate people who just had no reason or no capability of doing it.
During your investigation, did you do search warrants and subpoenas into Jared Bridegan and those in his immediate inner circle?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you download Jared Bridegan's phones, laptops, work phones, personal devices?
We did.
And you reviewed all those records?
We did.
Did you get financial records and call detail records for Jared Bridegan?
We did.
Did you get them for his wife, Kirsten Bridegan?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you get them for many people close to him in his family and inner circle?
We did.
Was there any indication through your investigation that anybody, putting aside Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez Saldana, had any problems with Jared Bridegan or any motive to carry out the homicide of Jared Bridegan?
No, there was not.
There's no debts that he was hiding,
Nope.
no evidence of drug use that he was hiding.
By all accounts, Mr. Bridegan was a very boring person who lived a very close and religious family life. He had no debts, had plenty of money in the bank, no indications of gambling or drug habits, no affairs, and these were all things that we checked for.
Okay. And you even spoke to people who even had minor arguments with Jared over the years, just to check them out and clear them.
Correct.
So during your investigation, at some point, did you start hearing from people that you should be looking at Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez Saldana as suspects?
Almost immediately.
And how did you get information directing you to look into these individuals?
We had several people come forward who shared stories that they had heard over the years of Ms. Gardner stating that she hated Jared and could not stand the fact that she had to share custody with him and that she wanted him dead.
And you heard this unsolicited from numerous people, not just one person.
Correct.
When you heard this information, did you investigate into the past history of Shanna Gardner and Jared Bridegan?
Yes, ma'am.
And they had gone through a pretty acrimonious divorce.
Correct.
And can you briefly describe for the court what that investigation uncovered for you?
They were divorced in 2015 and pretty much consistently between 2015 up until Jared's death, they were in court at least annually. Pretty much every aspect of the child custody was litigated and fought through mediation. It was to the degree that they no longer had any type of verbal communication about their children. Everything was done either in writing or through an attorney.
And from your investigation, were they even able to be in the same room together?
No,
How did they co-parent?
through the court.
When they went to the school, did they have separate parent-teacher conferences?
It was indicated that they had separate parent-teacher conferences, they would have separate doctor's appointments, or only one of them would attend the doctor's appointments. There was virtually nothing that they did together as far as their kids were concerned.
During your investigation, you spoke with Mr. Fernandez Saldana and Ms. Gardner, and did they tell you and corroborate this information that there was this bad relationship between them as co-parents?
Yes, much of this information came directly from them.
And from your investigation, can you describe for the court some of what you uncovered about what Ms. Gardner was trying to do through the court system in terms of Jared's ability to participate in co-parenting?
Ms. Gardner was attempting to initiate a quote-unquote social investigation or a DCF investigation in an effort to gain, if not majority custody, sole custody over the children so that she did not have to involve Mr. Bridegan in custody issues.
What kind of things were they disagreeing over in terms of child rearing?
Everything from schedules to who could be around when the children were there, and then to more severe things such as medication, medical devices that one of the twins needed. There was little that wasn't litigated.
What about religion?
One of a big contention, which I don't think it's ever made it to litigation, Mr. Bridegan did state that he wanted to raise his children in the Mormon faith, and Shanna did not want to raise the kids. At some point, one of the twins indicated that she wanted to be baptized into the Church of Latter-day Saints, and this was very troubling for Ms. Gardner.
And when we all hear that, can you put into perspective for the court how big of an issue religion was to Jared Bridegan?
He was a devout member of his church, a very faithful person, so it would have been an extreme issue for him.
I also want to talk about Shanna Gardner's financial motivations. Earlier, we saw records from the Shanna Gardner Irrevocable Trust. Can you describe for the court, have you seen the trust documents yourself?
I have.
Can you describe for the court what the trust is and what it was, I guess, created to do?
The trust would operate as a separate entity. The trust was funded by Ms. Gardner's parents, and it was a way that they could essentially give money for the benefit of Ms. Gardner and the twins that would not be considered her personal income. And so therefore, Mr. Bridegan would not have any access to those funds. In this case, the grantors were Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, and the trustee was Gardner-Fernandez.
So the trust not only was something that people with a lot of money do with their money, there was also partially motivated by wanting to prevent that money from being litigated in the courts between Jared Bridegan and Shanna Gardner.
That's correct.
Had they had a history of litigating finances in addition to all the child custody issues?
Yes, during their divorce, their financial situation, especially their marital home, was heavily litigated.
And I'm turning to a portion of State's Composite Exhibit 6. Detective Johns, this is from the trust document itself. Can you describe for the court what this clause means?
This clause states that once Ms. Gardner has no more legal entanglements with her ex-husband, Mr. Bridegan, she may elect to serve as trustee of her trust, essentially giving her control over the assets inside the trust.
At the time of Jared Bridegan's death, who was the acting trustee of the trust?
Gardner-Fernandez.
I want to turn your attention to what we discussed earlier, that you actually spoke with Mr. Fernandez-Saldana and Ms. Gardner in the course of your investigation. How many times did you speak with Shanna Gardner after the homicide of Jared Bridegan?
I spoke to her twice.
And let's talk about that first interview. Did that occur March 1st, 2022?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you speak with Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez-Saldana at the Jacksonville Beach Police Station?
I did.
Okay. Did you ask them to come to the police station and speak with you?
Initially, yes, I did.
And were you speaking to many, many other people as you testified earlier? At that point, you had no suspects.
We were doing dozens of interviews.
What was the purpose of these conversations with them? Were they custodial interrogations? Were they under suspicion at that time?
Absolutely not. At that time, we were just really collecting information about who Jared was, anyone that he might have associated with. We wanted to basically know everything we could about him. Really, he was kind of the focus at that point in our investigation.
Well, what did you advise Ms. Gardner was the purpose of your conversation with her on March 1st, 2022?
I stated at that time we were doing something that we refer to as victimology.
And that would be a background investigation into the victim, in this case, Jared Bridegan.
Correct.
When you spoke with her, did you speak with her in what's called the soft interview room at Jacksonville Beach Police Station?
Correct. We have two interview areas. One of them would be what someone would maybe describe as an interrogation room. There's no soft furniture. It's very hard, very cold. This is just a room with a couch and a couple of chairs, and it's where we conduct our interview, really just more interviews versus interrogations.
And Ms. Gardner was brought to that room for her interview?
Correct.
Just like every other witness you spoke to in this case?
That's correct.
And during that conversation, just a brief overview of her demeanor and how that interview sort of began.
She was very forthcoming. It was a very typical interview. She was very talkative and provided a lot of context without a whole lot of questions being asked.
And you say provide a lot of context. What was the general tone of that context she provided?
The general tone of it was, I don't really know a whole lot about Jared now, but I will tell you how he was when we were married and what our divorce was like. Essentially, he was manipulative and caused her a lot of trauma, and then moving on to, we had a terrible divorce, and then talking about how that affected the children, and so on, really.
Did she bring up at any point that Jared Bridegan was at all abusive towards her, physically or verbally?
She stated that he was in fact not physically or verbally abusive.
And during this conversation, part of the reason you spoke to her is that she and her husband, Mario Fernandez, and her children, A.B. and L.B., were the last people to see Jared Bridegan alive.
That's correct.
And did she give you some indication as to where everybody was in the house during the time of the homicide?
She stated that when the kids were dropped off by Mr. Bridegan, Mario was asleep and she was cooking with her earphones in the kitchen.
Did she say where he was sleeping?
I don't know that she stated that where he was sleeping during her interview, but he indicated that he was on the couch.
Did you have a second, and you also interviewed Mario Fernandez Saldana separately, but on the same date as this interview?
Correct.
I want to jump forward. April 15th, 2022, did you have a second interview with Ms. Gardner?
I did.
And how was it that you came to interview her a second time?
At that point, we were not anticipating having a second interview. We were actually approached by Mr. Fernandez. He asked if they could come by. They were receiving a lot of media scrutiny or people from their neighborhood complaining, basically accusing them of being involved in this. So Mr. Fernandez specifically wanted to know if this was something that we were encouraging or that if we were behind it. We indicated that we were not behind that. And then he just wanted to vent his frustration to what was going on. After speaking with him, we asked if Ms. Gardner wanted to come by and basically do the same thing, and she agreed to come speak with us.
Like the first interview, was this what we would call a soft interview or a custodial interrogation?
It was a soft interview.
Same interview room with the couches?
Correct.
No reading of Miranda rights?
No.
No questioning of her as a suspect?
Correct.
During this interview, describe her demeanor.
This demeanor, she was much more upset, but she was upset because she felt like she was being attacked in the media or on social media, really. And she did not feel safe leaving her home because people were recognizing her and they were basically blaming her for this homicide.
In this particular interview, did you ask her many questions?
No, not at all.
Did she do most of the talking?
She didn't.
Unprompted?
Yes.
You did ask her a question about whether she had any theories about what happened to Jared.
Towards the end of the interview, we asked if she had any theories about what she thought might have happened.
Did she?
She provided some.
And let's start there. What did she say she believed happened to Jared Bridegan?
She said that maybe it was a drug deal gone wrong or a gang initiation, and then she stated that we should look into Kirsten Bridegan.
What did she say about it being a drug deal gone wrong? What made her think that that was a possibility as conveyed to you?
She said that she had heard from friends that Sanctuary Boulevard was where you go to buy drugs in Jacks Beach.
And you're a general investigations detective with the Jacksonville Beach Police Department. Based on your knowledge and your years with the force, is that true?
I have never heard that.
Okay. What about, you mentioned gangs. What did she say about gangs?
She said that she had heard that some gangs do initiations by doing drive-by shootings like this.
Okay. And in your experience with the Jacksonville Beach Police Department, have you all ever had a gang-related drive-by shooting initiation case involving the murder of a father in a vehicle with his child at 7:50 p.m.?
I'm unaware of any of them.
In general, do you get many gang initiation shootings in Jacksonville Beach?
I'm not aware of any.
Lastly, what did she tell you about Kirsten Bridegan?
Just that we should look into her as a suspect for the homicide.
Did she give you any reasons?
Not that I can recall at this point.
All right, so she gave you these theories to potentially investigate. Presumably she was trying to be helpful.
Presumably.
Did she ever mention that you all should investigate Mario Fernandez Saldana?
No.
Did she ever mention any conversations she had with Mario Fernandez Saldana about killing Jared Bridegan?
No.
Did she ever mention someone by the name of Henry Tennant?
She did not.
Did she ever mention anything about knowledge of a vehicle that looked like the one in the news release that Jacksonville Beach put out?
No.
Did she ever mention to you that people might come forward saying that she had said she wanted Jared Bridegan dead?
No.
Did she ever mention to you that people may come forward saying that either she or Mario Fernandez Saldana had talked in the past about hiring a hitman to kill Jared Bridegan?
No.
Was that your last contact with Miss Gardner?
Yes, it was.
Now, after that point, you began to develop leads in your investigation, and you began to look at some point at Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez Saldana as suspects.
That's correct.
And you zeroed in on Henry Tennant and were able to identify him as a person of interest, perhaps the shooter.
Correct.
And after his arrest, you were able to obtain evidence further into his involvement, as well as the involvement of Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez Saldana.
That's correct.
I want to go through some of what your investigation revealed after you last spoke with Ms. Gardner. And for the court's information, in the state's exhibit, there's a composite 7. It's an extraction report of a cell phone belonging to a woman named Kim Jensen. Detective Johns, who is Kim Jensen in relation to Ms. Gardner?
Kim Jensen was a lady that Miss Gardner met when she moved to Jacksonville. They were a member of the same ward or church, and they became very good friends, by all means, best friends.
Did their friendship begin before Jared Bridegan and Miss Gardner were divorced?
No, their friendship did begin before their divorce, correct?
So she knew her when she being Miss Jensen, knew Miss Gardner when she was married to Jared Bridegan.
Yes, that's correct. And in fact, she knew Jared longer than she knew Miss Gardner.
Based on your investigation, we see your text messages. At some point, did you obtain a cell phone download of Kim Jensen's phone?
We did.
And was there contact between Miss Jensen and Miss Gardner?
There was extensive contact on a daily basis between the two of them,
For how long?
at least going back to 2015.
And how frequent was their contact with each other?
It was numerous times a day, phone calls, text messages,
Voice notes?
all kinds of things.
And from your review of, not relevant to the homicide necessarily, but for context, your review of their contact, did they seem to have a very close and open relationship?
It would certainly appear that way.
They talk about the most intimate details of their lives,
Yes,
the most mundane details of their lives.
yes.
So we're looking at here State's Composite Exhibit 8. These are text messages on Ms. Jensen's phone that you found between her and Shanna Gardner dating back to 2015. And we're going to start there and work our way forward to 2022. I know it's difficult to read. Can you please describe for the court the conversation, tone, and tenor between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen regarding Jared that began around this time period?
The context of this particular chat chain is Shanna telling Ms. Jensen that Matt is ready to come over there and to talk to him, meaning Mr. Bridegan. She said it would not get physical, and maybe then moves on to basically say, you know, that they could maybe encourage it to become physical at some point.
Ms. Stifler, what did you identify this as?
This would be State's Composite Exhibit 8.
8, okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, my computer decided to reset its password in the middle of this.
Okay.
In 2015, what was the status of Shanna Gardner and Jared Bridegan's relationship?
In the beginning of 2015, they were still married, and they did eventually divorce in 2015.
Moving on to page 2 of State's Composite Exhibit 8, more text between Ms. Gardner and Kim Jensen, and what are they talking about here?
Says Matt was ready to come over here today and talk to him. It wouldn't get physical yet, but I'd tell him if these things happen, X, Y, and Z, then A, B, and C will happen to him. And if he calls the cops, Matt would know, and A, B, C would happen. He said, I tell him he can thank the beautiful woman he's leeching off of that he is even still alive, because if it were up to him, he would have disappeared months ago. I told him your comment about the casserole, ha ha ha. We both had a good laugh.
Okay, and then Ms. Jensen replies, and she talks at some point in this text here about funeral potatoes. Did that phrase become relevant to your investigation?
It did. There were two phrases that kind of were a continuation during all of their text messages. One of those referred to as a casserole, also aka funeral potatoes, or then there was the phrase of doing magic.
Alright.
Sorry.
So sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Let's talk about the funeral potatoes casserole. Did these words, were they used frequently in conversations between Shanna Gardner and Kim Jensen?
Yes, they were.
And in what context were they used?
In reference to the death of Jared.
So there's more text here about funeral potatoes. These are, in fairness, everybody blows off steam when they're mad at their ex-husband.
Absolutely.
Okay. But at some point, did these texts continue and escalate to the point where they became significant to your investigation?
There was a continuation of this type of texting between them throughout their entire relationship that we were aware of, starting in 2015 through at least 2021. And I would say that the messages get much more vulgar than this.
Okay. So here we have, again, on State's Composite Exhibit 8, text messages from 2015. Shanna Gardner saying, I would happily watch them give him the lethal objection. They're talking about they would love to see him get the death penalty and they could make a casserole. And moving on, again in State's Composite Exhibit 8, more text messages. And in these ones, there's a discussion. Can you describe to the court where this discussion develops?
These are essentially theories of what they could do to, Ms. Jensen refers to Jared as stupid.
Okay, so stupid, and we'll see that in other text messages. That was a nickname that Ms. Gardner, Ms. Jensen used to refer to Jared Bridegan.
Correct.
Okay. So what direction does this conversation take?
It's essentially just more about ways that Ms. Gardner is unhappy with Mr. Bridegan, that she would like for him no longer to be alive, and then they talk about the casserole, and then they will move on to other things as far as how to cause his death.
These are difficult to read. This is State's Exhibit Composite 9. These are texts in 2016, and the next slide will be zoomed in a little bit. But here we see Ms. Gardner, this is the first time she brings up the word hitman in her discussions with Ms. Jensen. Can you describe for the court what this conversation centers around and how it develops?
Essentially, Ms. Gardner's upset. She says it's too late to get a hitman. I'm serious. I think Ms. Jensen is trying to kind of talk her down a little bit. And then they move on to basically where they start talking about, does she know anyone that could actually carry out this plan?
And we see that down here in the bottom. You can draw on the screen too if there's anything you want to circle. That Ms. Jensen says, I know Sue's husband knows people. Ms. Gardner replies, and then replies, I'm not even joking, I want him gone. And the conversation goes on from there. At the time they're having this conversation, and here's a zoomed in version of it, Simultaneous with this conversation, did you also find text messages between Ms. Jensen and the person that they were discussing finding them a hitman in the previous slide?
Correct. So while this conversation was going on, Kim Jensen reaches out to the person that they're referring to and asks if she knows anyone that can do magic, i.e. make someone disappear, referring to, do they know anyone?
And one quick second. These text messages between Ms. Jensen and the third party are referenced in both the exhibit we just looked at and text messages that you found later, correct?
That's correct.
And in your conversations with Ms. Jensen, she disclosed to you that she reached out to this person because of her conversations with Ms. Gardner.
Correct.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would seek to move into evidence that's been marked as State's K as State's Exhibit 10.
Any objection?
I'm sorry, as State's J as State's Exhibit 18.
Your Honor, single objection. I don't see anything in here where Ms. Gardner is asking Ms. Jensen to reach out to sue. I don't know how that can be, what Ms. Jensen did can be used against Ms. Gardner at this point. Again, we're talking about things that are 6 years prior to the killing of Jared Bridegan. I don't believe there's any allegation from the state whatsoever that this led to anything, or that even in the state's theory, to the death of Mr. Bridegan. It's totally irrelevant. It is so stale, and this court should not even consider it for purposes of this bond hearing. It's not relevant.
Your Honor, that
Even as a co-conspirator statement?
Are they saying that the conspiracy went back to 2016? Is that the state's argument?
Ms. Stepler?
Your Honor, the date range encompasses these text messages in the charged indictment. There are further statements leading up to the death of Jared Bridegan between these individuals. They are relevant because they show Ms. Gardner's state of mind, intent, incitement, encouragement as it relates to being a principal of first-degree murder. This is a bond hearing. The rules of evidence are loosened. There is no jury before the court. The court can give whatever weight to these text messages it deems fit based on the argument of Mr. Carodi, but his argument goes to the weight, not the admissibility. They are admissible because they are simultaneous statements to a conversation she's having with Ms. Jensen to a third party that is then referenced by Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen about what it is they're planning to do or hoping to see done.
As far as the dates, the indictment covers a different time period for the conspiracy. I'm looking at it. As account two, the conspiracy covers one in between.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I see it now.
Your Honor, and I would argue then we have a multiple conspiracy problem here. What are they actually charging us as a conspiracy? Because the conspiracy, I think that you have a multiple conspiracy problem.
Maybe for a jury, but why would that apply in a bond hearing?
Judge, the argument would be relevant as to purposes of this hearing, which would be, one, because there's only one capital offense on this indictment, the proof evident presumption grade, and the evidence that the state must carry with regard to that is only to the first degree murder charge. So evidence of the conspiracy, I would say, is not relevant. And then the second question would be the state's motion for pretrial detention, which is generally, is she a danger to the community or a flight risk? And I don't see how this evidence would be relevant to that either. And I don't believe there's any connection to this piece of evidence and the killing of Jared Bridegan in February of 2022.
What's the connection?
The connection goes to her intent, incitement, encouragement. Her intent that the crime be committed, which is the first element of the principal language. She's a principal of first degree murder. She wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. She's the one who set the events in motion, and the state has to prove that she had the intent specifically that the murder of Jared Bridegan take place. So all of these statements and all of this interaction with her co-conspirators and her attempts to solicit and conspire with other individuals that failed up until the point she found the ability to complete the task with Mario Fernandez and Henry Tenen are relevant to her intent.
I guess my question would be, that's why this is admissible. Why would the conspiracy of KJ reaching out to whoever those text messages would be relevant in the connection to Ms. Gardner?
Because she attempted to bring in these individuals into her conspiracy that ultimately resulted in the death of Jared Bridegan and Mario Fernandez Saldana, as the court will hear from Detective John's testimony later in this hearing.
Judge, if the court reads these text messages that are on the screen, Ms. Gardner never asked Ms. Jensen to reach out to Sue. This is Ms. Jensen on her own volition. I don't know how that intent can be imputed to Ms. Gardner.
Give me just a moment. These are hard to read. What are the timing of those other messages?
So when she and Ms. Gardner suggesting is it too late to get a hitman, she says, I know Sue's husband knows people. She says, I'm not even joking, I want him gone. That's at 1:31 p.m., 7/17/2016. The following slide shows contact between Ms. Jensen and another party on that same date at 4:33 p.m. And then State's Exhibit Composite 9 includes text messages on 7/19 and 7/21 in which Ms. Gardner asks Ms. Jensen, do I ask so-and-so about people? Should I ask him today? Referencing the same person that Ms. Jensen and this other third party were discussing.
Tell me the date and time of that.
That one would be July 21st and July 22nd. She asks on July 21st, do I ask X about people? I'd wait. July 22nd, can I ask M today? Let's see what H says.
Okay, give me a second.
Yes, ma'am. They're also using language in this text that's at issue, code words that they use in other discussions, such as magic, making someone disappear, etc. This conversation clearly is in context of Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen discussing, asking these people. She just reached out. It doesn't, my contention is she did ask her to reach out. When she says, Sue's husband, I know people, she says, I'm not even joking. I want him gone. That seems like the go-ahead to reach out. I think it's relevant, and the follow-up conversation they have references the conversation Ms. Jensen had with this third party. In the context of following up, let's ask these people. Following up, let's ask these people. Using the code word that she uses with the third party. It gives context to what the defendant and Ms. Jensen are discussing.
And the messages you're saying are on the same date, just
Yes,
later in
ma'am.
the time?
And these messages between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen, they're saying things,
No, I'm saying the messages that are in question are on the same date, just later in time? You
Yes,
said
ma'am.
4 o'clock?
they were at 4:30. This conversation continues from 1:27 PM through 4:49:56 PM, in which they're discussing these code words, Chris Angel, magician, disappear. The texts with the third party are in the midst of these text messages also discussing magicians and making people disappear. And then Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen in the following days reference the individuals that are connected to this third person.
Is that the one at 17? I'm sorry, 7:17 at 4:45? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, ma'am. On the third column, the first, one, two,
The
three,
fourth?
four text messages. And then the first text message in the fourth column. And then the last text message in the second column, and the entire first column.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, I'll overrule the objection.
All right, Detective Johns, I sort of did it for you. I went through these text messages. In these messages, Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen are discussing getting a hitman, not even being joking, and asking if Sue's husband is.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. And that would be Jay coming in as State's 18.
All right, I'll overrule the defense objection. J will be marked as State's Exhibit 18. All right, I'm sorry. You may proceed.
And Detective Johns, we are speaking about older messages, but in your course of your investigation, did this type of discussion continue between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen all the way up to Jared's death?
It does.
And in these messages, they used what you mentioned earlier to be another one of their favorite code words to describe Jared's killing, which would be magic, magician, disappearing act, Chris Angel.
Correct.
So here we are at State's Exhibit now 18. These are text messages between Ms. Jensen and SL. And in these messages, Ms. Jensen is asking her if she knows someone, and she says, Shanna needs a guy. And what direction does this conversation take?
Basically, Ms. Jensen's reaching out to Ms. Lee and stating, hey, Shanna needs a guy who does permanent disappearing acts. And she says that she needs a magician for stupid, referring to Mr. Bridegan, and ask if she knows anyone who can basically accomplish this.
And then the messages between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen following that conversation, do they again reference this idea of magic or magician?
Yes, they're initially talking about ways to destroy Mr. Bridegan, in reference to feeding him things that might give him a heart attack. And then Shanna makes the comment that the best time for quote unquote magic is when they're amicable.
And then here, she and Ms. Jensen are discussing the potential individuals they could contact, including someone named Matt.
Yeah, she makes reference to Matt, who she had talked to earlier, who was the trainer from the YMCA that she had the alleged affair with.
Okay. We don't need to get into that for purposes of this hearing. They're referring to someone named Nick, and she says between one of those four. So we have several people, Matt, Nick, the individual that she was speaking to Ms. Lee about, and they start referring to them by code names. So M, and then the next slide, which is there are 2 days of follow-up, July 21st and July 22nd. This is Ms. Gardner in the dark gray, and she is asking Ms. Jensen, do I legit ask Matt about people? Ms. Jensen says to wait, she says nothing, and then the next day, they're again asked, can I ask M today, and to see what H says. Now these text messages this is not the only contact that Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen are having. They're not just solely communicating by text, are they?
No, they're communicating via phone and other ways as well.
So in some of these text messages, are there points where the conversation ends and a phone call begins?
Correct.
And we're going to move on to some 2021 text messages in a moment, but I want to talk about how this kind of discussion continues with Ms. Gardner, not just with Ms. Jensen, but with other individuals. So these text messages go up through 2016. I want to discuss some of these individuals who came forward voluntarily to the Jacksonville Beach Police Department with evidence that Ms. Gardner had made similar comments to them. So let's begin in 2017. Did a relative of Jared Bridegan seek you out?
Yes, Justin Bridegan, who was Jared's brother, came to the police station. He had stated that he had also left the Church of Latter-day Saints, and when Miss Gardner had found that out, she reached out to him and stated that she wanted to get the cousins together, and so they ended up going over to Mr. Bridegan's home, and where they're letting the kids play. During that time period, Miss Gardner made the statement to Justin that she at times was so angry with Jared that she considered hiring a hitman to take him out.
Did he believe her to be joking? Did he say whether she said this in a joking manner?
He indicated that he thought that she was being very serious. However, due to the fact that they were divorced, and it was made in the past tense context, that wasn't something that he needed to alert the police, but he did believe her to be very serious about it.
And other than M and H and all these other individuals, did anybody come forward to you and say that Ms. Gardner attempted to solicit them to actually act as a hitman for Jared Bridegan?
Yes, during the time of their divorce, a tattoo shop owner had come forward by the name of Brad Bird. He stated that he had spent a lot of time with Ms. Gardner when she was getting her tattoos and some other things. And one night they had decided to go out for drinks afterwards. And during that time period, she stated that she needed someone to shut Jared up and asked him if he knew people who shut people up. He indicated that the way that he took that conversation was that she was looking for someone to murder her then husband.
And I also want to talk about an individual who came forward and provided a sworn statement to investigators regarding conversations she had with Ms. Gardner, specifically involving her husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana.
I believe the conversation happened in 2017. A friend and coworker of Ms. Gardner's had come forward and stated that this had been at the time that she was just meeting Mario and they had started dating. And she stated that Shanna told her that Mario had a military background and that he could take some guys, break into Jared's house, and take care of him, and no one would ever know what happened.
Moving on to, now it's going to be State's Exhibit 10. These are text messages between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen in 2021. And this is a sample, but are there multiple text messages in which Ms. Gardner expresses her discouragement with the child custody battle she's having with Jared Bridegan?
Yes, there are lots of examples, both verbally and written, where she is very unhappy sharing the kids with Mr. Bridegan.
And she uses language, not just, I want to use the court system, but I'll never be happy so long as they're involved or alive.
Correct.
And then again, this is a pretty lengthy message to Ms. Jensen from Ms. Gardner. And in this, she expresses that she can't bear the thought of 9 more years of fighting for custody of her children. And this is again State's Exhibit 10. So once you got this phone download from Ms. Jensen, before receiving these messages, had you spoken with Ms. Jensen about her knowledge of Shanna Gardner's involvement in the death of Jared Bridegan?
Yes, she came to the police station and we did interview her.
Did she mention any of this information when she spoke to you at the police station?
Not at all.
Did you serve her or assist in serving her with a subpoena to testify in front of a grand jury in February of 2023?
We We did.
Did she appear at the grand jury and give testimony?
She did.
When you gave her that subpoena, were you also monitoring Ms. Jensen's poll records and calls?
Yes, we were.
And when she got the subpoena for grand jury, did she contact Ms. Gardner?
She did.
And actually, when she was at the grand jury, was Ms. Gardner calling her?
Yes, she was.
And what has Ms. Jensen told you about her relationship with Ms. Gardner, up and through the murder?
She stated that they were very good friends, best friends, and that basically that Miss Jensen is kind of Shanna's like confidant.
And what does she express about her view of the Jared Bridegan versus Shanna Gardner history?
She is Team Shanna, according to her wording. She was not a fan of Jared Bridegan, and she has a lot of admiration for Miss Gardner.
Okay, and she described herself as Team Shanna even after Jared's homicide and even after she was brought in to give testimony in grand jury and on other occasions involving Ms. Gardner's potential involvement.
That's correct.
Eventually, were you present when Ms. Jensen was interviewed in July into August of 2023?
I was.
And at that point, you had all these text messages that she had not disclosed to you.
That's correct.
And when you spoke to Ms. Jensen, with this evidence available, did Ms. Jensen give further testimony about Shanna Gardner's involvement in the planning and the homicide of Jared Bridegan?
She did.
I'm going to go through some of those statements. What did she tell you about her conversation specifically with Mario Fernandez Aldana about killing Jared Bridegan?
She relayed that there were instances where he was so close that he could touch him, and Jared didn't know it.
And just to be clear, Ms. Jensen said that Shanna disclosed to her things that Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez spoke about.
Correct.
Did she say that they had several conversations, one conversation?
There were multiple conversations over a multi-year period about Mario killing or finding people who could kill Jared.
Okay. And now we'll get into the specific statements. What did Ms. Jensen say Ms. Gardner disclosed to her about Mario and her plans to kill Jared Bridegan?
She made a statement about him, like I said, having people, there were a motorcycle gang that lived behind his house that he could get to kill Jared. That there were times where Mario was so close she could reach out and grab Jared and cause his death. And then just more ways that Mario was capable and the right person to get rid of Jared.
Did she say specifically if there was a certain time or context that Mr. Fernandez Aldana would offer to do this for Ms. Gardner?
It was typically when she would be either upset with him or when she was upset more so at something that had happened between her and Jared in regards to the children. When she would be upset about some type of custody issue or some kind of disagreement they would be in, Mario's solution was always to offer to take care of Jared.
And did Kim Jensen tell you what Shanna took take care of, I'm using quotes, to mean?
That would be to kill Jared Bridegan.
And you mentioned that Ms. Jensen disclosed that Shanna Gardner told her Mario was so close to Jared he could touch him. Did she explain what that meant? Did he actually follow him and was so close he could touch him?
Yes, there were times where he would watch his movements or, like I said, follow him and try to, develop patterns of what he did and where he went and what would be the best way to carry out some type of plan.
Did he call these, did he use any phrasing to describe these moments where he could have done something to Jared Bridegan?
Missed opportunities.
Here's some of the statements we talked about. Did Mario also disclose, or did Ms. Gardner disclose to Ms. Jensen that Mario Fernandez Aldana had followed him in a vehicle on a prior occasion?
Yes, that he had followed him from the house back to St. John's County.
And what about to the hospital?
Don't recall that one.
Okay. Did Ms. Gardner disclose to Ms. Jensen why there was a delay or some kind of reason that this plan wasn't coming to fruition at the time period they're talking about?
There was some discussion between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen that there was a delay in killing Jared, and that was Mario's excuse was, well, it's during COVID, no one leaves their house during COVID, so therefore I can't get a hold of him if he never leaves his house.
During this meeting with Ms. Jensen, did she advise you about Shanna Gardner's knowledge of Henry Tennant?
She did. She stated that she had met Mr. Tennant and that she knew that he owned the truck that we had released to the media that we were looking for.
And to be specific, Ms. Jensen told you that she had conversations with Shanna Gardner about Henry Tennant. Were those conversations before or after Henry Tennant was charged with the murder of Jared Bridegan?
Those were before.
So before Henry Tennant was publicly named as the individual involved in the murder of Jared Bridegan, Shanna Gardner and Kim Jensen had discussions about him.
That's correct.
And they had discussions about him owning a truck.
Owning the truck. On surveillance video that we found the night of the homicide, we'd identified a vehicle of interest that we believe was involved in the homicide, and that was in fact later proved to be the truck that Mr. Tennant owned.
And Ms. Jensen disclosed to you that Shanna Gardner had discussed this vehicle with her prior to Henry Tennant being arrested for murder, or knowledge that that truck belonged to him being public.
Correct.
I want to talk lastly regarding Ms. Jensen's disclosures at this meeting about what she told you about a trip to Hawaii. The Gardner family, can you describe for the court this annual kind of vacation that they were doing to Hawaii?
They have an annual family trip where they all go to Hawaii, and would appear to include all of the parents, all the children, and then their spouses and grandchildren.
And was there a trip to Hawaii in 2022 prior to the murder of Jared Bridegan?
There was a trip to Hawaii approximately a week before the murder.
And did Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez Saldana go on that trip to Hawaii?
They did.
And did they return approximately,
About 4 days before the murder.
so around February 12th, 2022?
Correct.
And did Ms. Jensen describe for you a conversation that Shanna Gardner told her she had with Mario Fernandez Saldana in the week before Jared was killed?
The text messages between the two of them would indicate that their conversation had to do with the fact that Shanna was frustrated with the marriage and that she was going to call it off with him, and that they had discussed that and that they were starting plans to do that. However, later she indicated that during that time frame, Mario stated to Shanna that Mario was going to in fact kill Jared, and that if she didn't want it to happen, she needed to speak up and say it now.
Ms. Jensen told you this, and obviously you had the testimony from Henry Tennant, that Mario Fernandez came to him the day or day of the homicide on February 16th saying he needed to do this now to save his marriage.
Correct.
Ms. Gardner never mentioned any of this information to you when she sat down with you on April 15, 2022.
No.
Is this information that would have been of interest to you as the investigator into the murder of Jared Bridegan?
Absolutely.
And instead, she actually gave you other theories that could send you down a wild goose chase.
Correct.
And I anticipate that when you're cross-examined, or when defense makes argument, that there will be some indication that Ms. Gardner said no or didn't really know Mario was serious about doing this. So I want to talk to you about her actions and some of your investigation into her actions following the death of Jared Bridegan. So start with the interviews you did with Mr. Fernandez Saldana and Ms. Gardner in March and April of 2022. Did you also do recorded interviews with Ms. Gardner's children, biological children with Jared Bridegan, whom I'm going to refer to as LB and AB?
We did not specifically do those interviews. However, the child protection team at the University of Florida did them.
Okay. And I know the court's familiar, but can you explain why it is that you all send children to the child protection team instead of doing interviews yourself?
We generally do not interview anyone under the age of 13. We would send them to a team that includes child psychologists or other trained individuals in a non-threatening, non-traumatic environment to conduct these interviews.
And did AB and LB come to the child protection team and give a recorded forensic interview with the child experts?
Yes, they did.
Do you recall around the date of those interviews?
It would have been a day or two after my initial interview with Shanna.
So sometime in early March of 2022.
Correct.
During the interviews with LB and AB, you obviously got an accounting from them of where everyone was in the home that night. Did you
That's
note
correct.
discrepancies between their interviews and what Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez Saldana had told you?
They both, Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez stated that he was sleeping due to having a bad headache and taking some medication. Both of the kids indicated that they thought that Mario was in his gaming room. But they later stated that they never actually saw him. It was just that his game console was actively playing, so they just assumed that that's where he was at.
And Henry Tennant advised you in his sworn statement that Mario Fernandez actually was not at home playing video games or lying on the couch. He was driving the vehicle to the homicide scene to commit this murder.
That's correct.
So these children are brought to CPT to get this interview. Did Ms. Gardner accompany them?
Yes, she did.
Did Mr. Fernandez Saldana accompany them?
No, in fact, during one of the interviews, one of the children made a utterance that Mario was on his way to Canada with some friends to go camping.
Okay. And did you later get records, financial, call detail records, cell site location data to figure out if that was true or not?
We did. We got his financial records and we got his cell site data that showed that he essentially was making his way from Jacksonville to Brunswick, North Carolina, and up to Pennsylvania.
Did he go camping?
He did not go camping.
Was, based on your investigation, can you describe for the court what the nature of this trip was? Was it pre-planned, vacation, business?
I couldn't tell you what the nature of this trip was, other than the fact that he made surprise visits to some people that he barely knew, and he purchased toiletries on the way. Once he got past North Carolina and up into Pennsylvania, he was making hotel reservations as he was driving. So I would say it was not a planned trip.
And while he's making this unplanned trip up to Canada, presumably, was he in contact with Ms. Gardner by phone?
Yes, he was.
And at some point, did he cease contact with Ms. Gardner?
He was in contact with her essentially until the CPT interviews were done, and then he essentially turned around and came back home.
Moving to August of 2022, and this was a key point in your investigation. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
What happened August 18, 2022?
Mr. Tennant was arrested.
And up until that point, Henry Tennant was not on anyone's radar, so to speak, until probably when?
I would say maybe a few months prior to him being arrested.
And in your investigation, what was the relationship you uncovered of Henry Tennant to Mario Fernandez Saldana and Shanna Gardner?
He lived in one of their rental properties.
And who was the owner or manager of those rental properties?
I'm not sure legally if it was Mario Fernandez or their LLC, but one of the two.
And were you able to identify Henry Tennant as a person of interest in the murder of Jared Bridegan?
Yes.
Once you did that, did you, in conjunction with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, arrest Henry Tennant on unrelated charges?
Yes. We essentially formed a plan where we would arrest him once he started driving. He's a habitual traffic offender, and that plan was executed and he was taken into custody.
I don't think people at large understand. Is this like a common technique that law enforcement does when they're investigating a crime?
Yes, it is.
Does it provide the opportunity to interview somebody who's a potential subject or person of interest?
It does.
Does it present the opportunity to obtain leads and further evidence into that person?
Yes.
So when you arrested Henry Tennant on April 18, 2022, had his name been publicly released anywhere as a person of interest?
Not at all, no.
August of 18, 2022. Had you spoken to Mario Fernandez Saldana or to Shanna Gardner about this person, or asked them any questions or interviewed them about Henry Tennant?
Not at all.
When Henry Tennant was arrested, was he still living at that home that was run, so to speak, by the First Choice Home Rentals LLC?
Yes, he was.
When he was arrested, what did your investigation uncover about the activity between Mario Fernandez Saldana and Shanna Gardner when their tenant was arrested on a driving charge?
Right after he was arrested, the other gentleman who was living there used an associate's phone as to not be detected to call Mr. Fernandez.
And how do you know that?
He admitted to doing that.
He told you he used someone else's phone to contact Mario Fernandez Saldana to tell him Henry Tennant was arrested.
That's correct.
Okay. What did Mario Fernandez Saldana do?
This started a flurry of calls between Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez. And then Ms. Gardner then reached out to her attorney as well as her PR firm.
Okay. And I have here, is this a timeline of relevant calls for purposes of this hearing for that date, August 18, 2022?
That's correct.
MF means Mario Fernandez.
Correct.
Okay. It says here that Ms. Gardner was speaking with someone named Christopher Thomas of the Intrepid Group and someone named Linda Lucetti. Do you know who these individuals are?
I do.
And who are they?
Christopher Thomas is the owner or president of the Intrepid Group, and Linda Lucetti is a media relations consultant that often works with Mr. Thomas.
In the course of your investigation, did you identify these individuals as having been retained by Ms. Gardner during the course of this investigation to sort of help her with her PR?
Yes, that's correct.
And Intrepid Group and Linda Lucetti, are they based out of Salt Lake City, Utah?
That's correct.
And do they have some affiliation with Ms. Gardner's mother's company?
I believe one or both of them had done some work for Stamp It Up, and they were offering their services pro bono to Ms. Gardner.
What was significant to you about this type of contact on this date?
I mean, the significance to me is your tenant, who you would likely say that you had no clue was involved in this, was arrested for, you didn't know what charges at the time, yet you felt the need to alert your attorney and media consultants that your tenant of your rental property was arrested.
For a driving unsuspended license charge?
Right.
Did you make attempts to speak to Christopher Thomas and Linda Lucetti and other members of the Intrepid PR crisis management firm?
Myself and one of my colleagues flew to Utah in an attempt to speak with them, and they avoided us.
Can you be more specific about your attempts and their avoidance?
Well, Ms. Lucetti was running frantically around the front of her house as to hide from me so that I could see that she was in her house. Mr. Thomas was not at his office, went to his residence, and he had his wife answer the door a couple times to avoid speaking to me.
Were you eventually able to receive evidence and statements from Chris Thomas with Intrepid Group after he retained a criminal defense attorney?
Yes, as you said, you stated he hired an attorney and then contacted the state attorney's office directly.
Okay. And we'll get to the information they gave you in a moment. Moving on to states. What's been entered into evidence, States Exhibit 12. This is a text message between Ms. Jensen and Shanna Gardner on that date, August 18, 2022. It says, "I don't want anyone to know," and Ms. Jensen says, "I'm not." Can you describe for the court the context of these text messages?
I believe this was like a lunch date that was coming up, and they did not want anyone to know that their tenant had been arrested at that time.
And this text is from the date that Henry Tennant was arrested.
That's correct.
State's exhibit, composite exhibit 11, are these the text messages that were turned over by Intrepid PR Group?
Yes.
Okay, and
That's
this highlighted number, does that phone number belong to the associate of the Intrepid PR Group?
Yes.
And these texts are dated August 18th and August 22nd, 2022. Was there one person who was willing to speak to you when you went to Utah?
There was.
And without using her name, can you describe who she is?
She was a junior level social media manager at the PR firm.
And she no longer worked for them when you made your trip to Utah?
That's correct.
What did she tell you about the contact between Intrepid Group and their other PR associates at the time and Ms. Gardner on this date?
As soon as Ms. Gardner found out that their tenant had been arrested, she, her words, frantically was trying to reach someone with Intrepid. She couldn't get a hold of anyone else just due to the time difference. It was very early in the morning. However, this social media person answered her phone and started taking down notes to give to Chris Thomas later on.
What did she say Ms. Gardner relayed to her?
That their tenant had been arrested and that tenant owned the truck that the police were looking for.
Moving further into State's composite exhibit 11, these are text messages with the Intrepid PR Group. These individuals are employees of that group, correct?
That's correct.
And this is dated August 18, 2022, the date of Henry Tennant's arrest on driving on a suspended license, habitual charges. We see here, is this green, that is Mr. Thomas, who is the lead on her case.
Correct.
Okay. And he said he spoke with Shanna and there were interesting developments in her case. And then moving on, ignore the language, but the last text message is August 24th, 2022. Can you describe for the court what your investigation uncovered as to Mr. Thomas's knowledge regarding the charges?
Just that they weren't sure what the charges were, but it seemed to be unrelated to the truck or anything to do with Jared.
And again, at the time these messages are being sent, nobody other than the people who hired Henry Tennant would know of his existence as a link to the murder of Jared Bridegan.
Correct.
Other than Jacksonville Police.
Correct.
In the court's binder of exhibits, State's Exhibit 13 is a business record showing the authenticity of Apple records received. Did you receive evidence related to an iCloud belonging to Shanna Gardner?
Yes.
And in particular, were you looking for evidence in that cloud relevant to a Ring camera that Ms. Gardner and Mr. Fernandez Saldana had on the front of their house?
Yes, the Ring camera was located outside their front door. The day after detectives went and notified them of Mr. Bridegan's death, they asked to see if their Ring camera had picked up anyone who might have passed by the residence. Ms. Gardner showed the Ring to the detective, and there were no recordings past the 16th.
When you received the iCloud return of Ring footage, was there anything significant to you about what was or was not there?
On the iCloud were recordings from the Ring camera that we could also tell basically that the camera's settings were to constantly record. There were videos on the iCloud that showed both vehicles passing by their residence as well as customers coming to pick up orders or Mr. Fernandez putting an order outside their door. These were all things that would have been, it appeared would have always been picked up by the Ring camera. However, on the night of the homicide, there was no activity on the Ring camera, at least in the app, indicating that it was likely that the information was either deleted or the camera was set to not record.
And you know that because what did AB and LB told you, or what did they tell you about how they entered the house that night, the night of the homicide?
They indicated that they would typically go through the garage, however the garage door was closed, so they used the keypad on the front door, which would have been captured on the ring camera.
So based on what they told you, did you expect to see at least, at minimum, a ring footage video of AB and LB entering the home minutes before Jared Bridegan was killed on the night of the homicide?
Based upon the past history that was located in the iCloud, we expected to find them entering the residence as well as Jared's vehicle passing by the camera.
And there was no footage of those events?
That's correct.
And in fact, on this text message on August 22nd, 2022, which is around the same time period Ms. Gardner is speaking to her PR firm about potential charges against Henry Tenen, do she and Kim Jensen have a discussion about ring footage?
Yes, I sent a subpoena to Ring, which they were nice enough to forward to Mr. Fernandez and Ms. Gardner.
Okay, so Ring was not supposed to do that, I'm presuming.
No.
And so she is discussing, in this particular time in the investigation, which is significant to you, she and Ms. Jensen are discussing that Ring subpoena, and if they have it, if they've given the video.
Correct. In fact, it was actually a search warrant. It wasn't a subpoena. They referred to it as a subpoena.
And then State's Exhibit 14, this is a text with Ms. Jensen also regarding the cloud. And can you describe for the court what the significance of these texts are? This is September 2022.
This is Ms. Jensen basically asking Shanna, or talking to Shanna about whether or not she still has her old additional cell phone. And then they were basically stating that without her creating a new cloud ID, all of her data would just essentially be backed up to the secondary cell phone, which would defeat the purpose of having a second phone.
And Ms. Jensen makes a comment, I was thinking about that damn cloud.
Correct.
When you received, most of the evidence that we've discussed in this hearing came from the cell phone of Kim Jensen.
That's correct.
Did you do examinations of cell phones, devices, clouds, returns for Shanna Gardner?
Yes, we did. We did cell phone downloads as well as Google and iCloud search warrants.
In the returns of those items, devices, and returns, did you find the same conversations that you had found on Ms. Jensen's phone?
Some of the conversations were there, but a lot of the conversations were not.
So like the Ring cloud, or I'm sorry, the cloud of the Ring footage, you were expecting to see evidence that was not present on Ms. Gardner's devices.
That's correct.
Henry Tenen was eventually arrested and charged with the murder of Jared Bridegan.
That's correct.
And do you recall the date on which that occurred, or the time period on which that occurred?
Early January 2023.
Leading up to the arrest of Henry Tenen, were there investigative techniques being pursued by the Jacksonville Beach Police Department?
Yes, during the time that we knew we were going to announce the charges against Tenen, we had also received a court order for a wire intercept.
And a wire intercept to intercept phone, text, and audio communications between Ms. Gardner, Mr. Fernandez Saldana, and other individuals of interest.
That's correct.
And that court order was you did an application and a judge granted that.
That's correct.
In order to get chatter generated, what did you all decide to do to what the phrase being trigger communications?
We decided to go ahead and have the wire in place before the charges were announced against Mr. Tenen. We did that, and then we made the announcement about the arrest or the additional charges that have been added.
And before you made the announcement about Henry Tenen's arrest, did you purposely leak information to the media that a break or an arrest was imminent?
Yes.
And did the media run with that information?
Yes.
Okay. Did you say who was going to be arrested?
No.
So the information was just that an arrest or big break was coming.
That's correct.
And Your Honor, the state has moved into evidence 15, 16, and 17, which are wired recording calls of Ms. Gardner from the wiretap For time's sake, I'm not going to play the entire calls. I'm just have detective testify to the relevant portions. Beginning with call 170, which is State's Exhibit 15, what was one of the first calls that Shanna Gardner made after this leak was out and being publicized?
She was speaking with Ms. Jensen, wondering if she should give Mario a heads up about the information that she received.
And do you remember specifically in greater detail kind of how it was that she learned of the leak and what her reaction was?
I actually don't remember how she learned of the leak.
Did she describe to Ms. Jensen how she was going to give Mario a heads up or a warning that a big break was coming?
She talked about actually using her neighbor's phone in order to call Mario to give him information about it.
And that neighbor would be Marla Rogers?
That's correct.
During the entirety of the wiretap, was this a common theme that Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen discussed that their phones might be monitored?
Yes, that's correct. She made statements about the fact that she was warned that her phone was likely tapped.
And that was January 23rd, 2023. We're going to move on to a few days later when the arrest of Henry Tenen as the person responsible for the death of Jared Bridegan, at least responsible for the actual pulling of the trigger, is released. I want to discuss a phone call that Ms. Gardner made to her public relations firm on 1/25/2023. And I've included a portion of the transcript that the monitor used here. Can you describe for the court what was significant to you about this conversation?
She said that she admitted to knowing Henry, that she had met him approximately 5 years ago, but there should be no paperwork tying him to the rental property.
At the time that she made this call, the media, did a good job. They covered this fairly quickly, but at the time she made this call, had the media yet reported that Henry Tenen was linked to Mario Fernandez Saldana?
No.
At the time she made this call, had the media reported that Henry Tenen was a tenant to Mario Fernandez Saldana and Shanna Gardner's LLC?
No.
So in this call, she's telling them that Henry Tenen, the person under arrest, is in fact a tenant, but there's no paperwork or payments attaching him.
Correct.
What was the reaction of the individuals with Intrepid PR Group?
Their initial reaction was, well, that must have been a long time ago, right? Like you didn't, this was not a recent payment or anything like that. However, Ms. Gardner went on to tell them, in fact, that they had given him money earlier in the year. At that point, they basically told her that they should probably stop communicating about this.
So she advised the public relations firm that she and Mario Fernandez Saldana had paid Henry Tenen money for a pallet business within the past year.
Correct.
We discussed a call also made that day. I have the time notated wrong in here. It was at 17:27 on 1/25/23 between Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen. And was there another call in which she discussed Henry Tenen and monetary payment she made with Ms. Jensen?
Yeah, was essentially about whether they were was Tenen going to use the information against them to garner a better deal or throw them under the bus or twist them as being involved in this.
Throughout the course of the wiretap, Ms. Gardner, and here again they're referencing that she might reactivate her other one. Were there discussion amongst them about using other devices, platforms, phones, etc. to contact each other?
Ms. Gardner and Ms. Jensen would frequently talk about whether they could use FaceTime or other applications that were encrypted to communicate so that they could not be intercepted by law enforcement.
Not to give away state secrets, but can you evade law enforcement interception by using other platforms and devices?
Yes, you can.
The last thing I want to talk about is some of Ms. Gardner's activities following the arrest of Mario Fernandez Saldana, which came in March of 2023 after Henry Tenen gave testimony against him. Was Ms. Gardner living in Florida during the wiretap?
Yes. Or no, excuse me, she was in Washington State.
And how did you find out that Ms. Gardner had moved from Jacksonville, Florida to Washington State?
U.S. Postal Inspector.
After Mario Fernandez Saldana was arrested for the murder of Jared Bridegan, conspiracy and solicitation and child abuse, did Ms. Gardner remain in Washington State?
No, there was a 5-month period where she was not with her children and she was moving around,
And how did you determine that?
mostly through cell site records.
Where did you determine that she was living?
Appeared she had rented an Airbnb in Tallahassee for a while, and then at some point had moved on to Savannah.
And during this time, she was using a secondary phone or a different phone number than the one you had associated to her?
That's correct. She had activated, the day that she flew from Washington to Tallahassee, she had reactivated her quote-unquote burner phone.
And you say quote-unquote burner phone. Where did that quote come from?
When officers went to Washington to serve a search warrant, one of her children asked if we were looking for mommy's burner phone.
Detective Johns, obviously Ms. Gardner did have several phones and phone numbers during the time period of investigation prior to her arrest. And your team effectuated arrest on her in August of 2023 in West Richland, Washington.
That's correct.
Why did you all make the decision to effectuate an arrest on her rather than allowing her to turn herself in?
We wanted to make sure that she did not attempt to flee. Parents had considerable assets, and it would be very easy, given her geographic position, to get on a private jet and fly away.
When you did research into the financials of her home in West Richland, Washington, who bought that home and who paid for it?
It was purchased by an LLC that is owned by her parents.
Detective Johns, I have one more, Aaron.
Yes.
Detective Johns, I'm winding down. I just want to summarize the main points of your testimony that I think are important for the court to consider. One being, where did the money that was paid to Henry Tennant to kill Jared Bridegan come from?
The money came from the trust that was established by Mr. and Mrs. Gardner.
And was that trust held in the name of Shanna Gardner?
No. Well, it was, the trust itself was named the Shanna Gardner Irrevocable Trust, yes.
And the funds from the Shanna Gardner Revocable Trust that paid Henry Tennant were moved from the trust into First Choice Home Rentals LLC.
That's correct.
And the owners of the LLC are whom?
The owners of the LLC are Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez.
And Detective Johns, of your entire investigation, was there anybody else that you uncovered with a motive of such depth and breadth as that of Ms. Gardner to have Jared Bridegan killed?
No.
And in your investigation, you obviously uncovered all these trail of individuals and text messages in which Ms. Gardner incited, encouraged, solicited, and asked other individuals to help find someone, procure someone to do this task.
Yes.
And Ms. Gardner, again, never mentioned any of this information to you when you interviewed her as a witness looking for helpful information in this case.
That's correct. He never mentioned anything.
And she never came forward, even over time, as all of these other events unfolded, including Mario's Fernandez Saldana's unexplained trip up north, the arrest of Henry Tennant, her move to Washington, or her moves to Tallahassee and Savannah.
Correct.